Well, joining us now, a very special guest. Ian Bremmer has been watching the situation in West Asia very, very closely and is with us on this program. Ian, firstly, the health minister of Lebanon now says that nearly 2,000 people have lost their lives as a result of Israeli attacks, not just these attacks in the last couple of days, the incursion, but since the war per se started. Is there a potential of this really getting out of hand in terms of loss of life in Lebanon?
We also have heard about 1.2 million have been displaced in Lebanon. That's compared to 60,000 that have been displaced in Israel. And what that tells you is there are extraordinary military asymmetries in defense capabilities, offense capabilities, intelligence, and of course, technology. So, I mean, Israel's capacity, we'd heard for a very long time that Hezbollah is by far the most capable non-state military actor in the world. And of course, Iran's most important and capable proxy in the region, helping to ensure Iranian deterrence vis-a-vis Israel. That just clearly has not had an impact in terms of either deterring Israel from its ground invasion or in being able to strike Israel back. And I think it's very interesting to note that Iran's response to the Israeli assassination of Hamas's political leader in Tehran, the Iranians are not saying very much at all about Israel's ground war in Lebanon, not saying much at all about the strikes, the espionage, very effective against the pagers and the walkie-talkies, not saying very much about the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah, Lebanon's leader. So when you say, can it get out of hand? I mean, certainly you can imagine a lot of humanitarian damage to the Lebanese people, to the Lebanese economy. But I mean, short of a war between Iran, Israel, and the United States, Lebanon versus Israel, there's not likely to be much direct impact of it beyond the suffering of the Lebanese.
It's interesting, we will talk obviously about Iran, but Iran's new leader, new prime minister, today said that this was a war foisted on them. That's old, but what's new is that he also said that Iran wasn't looking for a war. Is it your sense that Iran believes that they have right-sized the attack on Israel, number one? And number two, they just don't want this to get beyond this?
It's very clear to me. I spent over an hour with Iran's vice president, Javad Zarif, last week when he was in New York. And every indication I got from him, and this was, of course, before the Iranian strikes, though he made it very clear that Iran reserved the right to retaliate and had not in any way taken that off the table, was that they do not want to fall into the trap of a broader war with Israel that the Americans would get dragged into, would be involved in. They think that that's very dangerous for them. Now, have they right-sized the response? I would say that there are no good options for Iran right now. If you remember their strikes against Israel back in April, with several hundred drones and ballistic missile strikes, they telegraphed those strikes through the Turks and the Iraqis to the United States almost a week before the strikes occurred. So the American military was in place. Everyone was ready for the strikes when they occurred, and they did virtually no damage. They were only targeting Israeli military targets at that point. This time around, you're looking at 180 ballistic missiles, so it's a significantly larger attack in terms of the explosive capability. The Americans only had a number of hours of advance notification, but they got that notification. And the Iranians targeted a broader array of targets inside Israel. Having said all of that, it was very interesting to me the way the Iranians presented this attack. They said, this is the entirety of our attempted retaliation. We're not going to do anything else. They said 90% of our missiles hit their targets. In other words, this was really big. It was really successful, when we all know it did virtually no damage. And the only person that was killed from an Iranian missile was a Palestinian in the West Bank.
Yeah.
Okay, and you want to talk about irony of all of this. So the Iranians are trying to send a message to their own population and their proxies that we're really powerful, where the message to the rest of the world is, we did really very little. Please don't hit us again. And they know that the Israeli prime minister is now much more popular, and that his war in Lebanon against Hezbollah is incredibly popular. And frankly, I expect that if Israel were to engage in broader strikes against Iranian critical infrastructure and military targets, that would be very popular in Israel. So, I mean, certainly if you're the Iranians right now, you have to understand that you are virtually friendless on the global stage, and that your military is nowhere near up to speed for a fight against Israel and the United States. You desperately want to avoid that.
Just in terms of what Israel could potentially do, if they were to deploy, fighter aircraft, it would mean crossing the airspace of 4 countries at least.
Correct.
So that's potentially a problem. There wouldn't be agreements on the ground. There could be other forces opposing them. If there is a ballistic missile strike by Israel, that certainly is a possibility. But what would they necessarily target? Would it be infrastructure facilities like ports, oil facilities? What else?
Yeah, so you raised a number of good points here.
Or the nuclear facility.
No.
I mean, that's what.
So let me try to address all of that, because it's complex. So first of all, back in April, when Israel responded to Iran's drone and missile strikes, again, failed, but nonetheless risky, and could have killed a lot of people if it had gotten through. So, I mean, that's one of the interesting ironies here, is that Israel's not trying to kill civilians, but huge numbers of civilians are getting killed in the crossfire on the basis of Israel targeting terrorists. Iran is trying to kill civilians, but can't, because they don't have the military capabilities, right? Yeah. So back in April, Israel hit a radar facility that was part of the defenses of Iran's nuclear program. So that was the clearest possible signal from Israel. We can hit the radar, and if you do this again, we're going to hit your nuclear facilities. And the United States, including President Biden, has directly said that they really do not want Israel to do that. Now, I think it was very important that after the Iranian strikes this week, the United States came back quite strong, said there would be retaliation, and that retaliation would come from Israel and the United States. Why are they saying that? And they're saying that because not only do they believe that if the U.S. and Israel coordinate, that it will limit an Iranian response, but they're also saying it because, of course, they want to constrain what Israel does. And that's why it's going to take longer. You're not seeing strikes yet. It's been a couple days. Doesn't matter. It may be a couple more days before we see those strikes. What might the Americans and Israel hit together? And as you say, Israel by itself has more constraints, needs the Americans more than attacking Gaza, Lebanon, sporadic attacks in the West Bank. It's difficult. And you didn't mention many of the core Iranian targets are dispersed and underground and hardened. It would be very hard for them to do this by themselves. So I expect, and I don't have any intelligence on this, classified intelligence, but I expect that the eventual attacks will be significant. They will be in a relatively short period of time. They won't be over days. They will target military and critical infrastructure, but not the Iranian government. There will be relatively limited casualties. And it will be announced that they've done it and it's over. So in other words, I think that the Iranians will have a clear capacity to significantly downplay that. And the Iranians are capable of that. You'll remember that when former President Trump ordered the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, the head of Iran's defense forces, a much bigger deal than killing the Hamas political leader in Tehran, a much bigger deal than even assassinating Hassan Nasrallah, the Iranian response was high on the rhetoric and virtually nothing in terms of kinetic response. And that is what I actually expect here. In other words, this is a very dangerous environment. If there were a major war, we would enter a global recession. We'd have oil prices over $100. It would affect the U.S. election. There is a lot at play here, but I don't expect that to happen.
What we've seen 2 nights back was a virtual video game. The fact that ballistic missile interceptors like Israel's Arrow actually work as advertised, the fact that the number of missiles which actually got through and caused damage on the ground were actually very few. That's all very well. I mean, the technology is incredible, and it has to be said that Iran's ballistic missile technology and hypersonics, which they've deployed, that's also fairly technologically advanced. But it has to be asked, how many ballistic missiles would Iran have left, and how many interceptors of the Arrow class would Israel have left? These are prohibitively expensive. They're very difficult to manufacture, and it just seems that missile exchanges may not be the way this would go on in the future. That might well and truly be over.
Well, we know that part of the reason Hezbollah is so ineffective right now is because of strikes that Israel has been engaged in, including across the border, for pretty much a year now. So it's not just about missile strikes. It's about intelligence capabilities. It's about the ability to engage in surgical targeting on the ground and elsewhere to undermine that capacity. And certainly, I fully expect that if Israel has the capacity to kill the Hamas political leader in an Iranian state building, that they probably have a lot of other capabilities that they have not yet, displayed. So I would be very surprised if Iran would have shot a significant percentage of their military capacity against Israel, knowing it wasn't going to do much. I suspect they would be keeping an awful lot in reserve, but that doesn't mean that it would be capable. I'll tell you again, Vice President Zarif told me that his attacks back in April, his government's attacks back in April, displayed that the Israeli Iron Dome is completely ineffective, is not invulnerable. That may be what he wants to say for his own purposes, but I don't think anybody. I don't think anybody internationally believes that.
Yeah. Look, Ian, it's been wonderful speaking to you, and it is a frightening situation, as I've been saying for the last couple of days on my program. What's the way forward? Perhaps we can talk about that at some stage. Thanks very much for being with us.
Great to see you.